I want to kick off the continuing series of the Gordon Institute's keynote panels, where we've been exploring many topics that are impacting business and technology trends and how they can be impacting your own business. And today we're going to be talking about the impact of social and environmental policies and the impact that businesses can have on those. And in order to do that, we're going to talk about both the pros and cons of the business impact, how we're going to measure the impact, and we're going to do that through an expert panel. And it's specifically to address some of the key challenges that we're facing in society right now, mainly around environmental impact and on societal changes and our ability to adjust to the needs of our populations and our people. To kick it off, I'd like to ask Kevin Oy, who is the Executive Director of the Gordon Institute, to give a brief intro to our programs.
No, thank you very much, Scott. And thank you all for joining. Thank you to the panelists that you'll be meeting momentarily. For us at the Gordon Institute, this is an opportunity to really bring forward topics in the industry and in society right now that may not have clear-cut answers, because we believe the best way to address the challenges that we face as a society is to bring people together so that they can hear each other's views and their actual perspectives so that we can collectively figure out what is best for all of us. This is a great example of that with the whole impact that we have on the world today, and thinking about how do we create a world that is sustainable and ecologically sound while also doing good for business and good for people simultaneously. Clearly in the press over the last year, there's been much discussion around ESG, and this is an opportunity for us to hear perspectives from multiple sides. So I thank Scott Hilton up front here for organizing this panel, pulling together the panelists and leading this discussion. But this is an example of the kind of discussion and dialogue that we at the Gordon Institute want to continue to incubate and continue to encourage, because we believe it's the best way to become educated consumers ourselves and educated business leaders. So with that, Scott, I turn it back to you.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks, Kevin. The Gordon Institute is dedicated to fostering leaders who will make a difference in the world. Our primary programs include our undergraduate programs, which focus on minors in entrepreneurship and management, but that focus specifically around social impact. That's one of our key motivators when we talk to with our students. In addition, we have graduate programs in innovation and in engineering management, which again really are designed to build leaders for the future. And then we have a range of professional education opportunities, including these keynote panels that will provide a lifelong learning opportunities from the Gordon Institute. And this is all under the auspices of the Tufts and the Department of Engineering and the Derby Entrepreneurship Center. Now we're going to shift to the topic of the day. There's not a day that goes by without clear indicators that we are in a period of transition, both in business and in society, and that we are dealing with the effects of climate change, the pandemic, changes in the way we work and where we work, social unrest in the world, geopolitical conflict. So we're clearly in a period of transition, and it's also clear that no one organization or body is going to be able to solve the problem. Not a single government can do it, not a single business could do it, and not even a single person, not even Elon Musk. Businesses have a role to play, and they have a responsibility to be a positive force in these changes in social and environmental dimensions. But if nothing else, to minimize their risks during these transitions and to find new opportunities. So we're going to explore that with our expert panel. Along the way, we're going to be having an interactive session. So we'll be asking you to contribute by providing questions in the Zoom question and answer function at the bottom of your display. So you can feel free to ask questions of either the panel in general or a specific panelist, and we will try to get to them. In addition, we'll be conducting a couple of polls to try to get a voice from the attendees. So what I'll do now is introduce our panelists, and they represent a range of voices around this topic. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to do full bios, but I am going to briefly introduce and then have them give a quick perspective. So from the investor perspective, Jack Colligan is going to be talking to us, and he works with investors on how they are going to best address and leverage ESG and social impact in order to improve their performance of their investments and also to do good. From the perspective of large multinational corporations in the forefront of social impact, Samantha Fontaine is joining us. From the apparel and textile industry and as an instructor at Tufts in corporate responsibility, Ariel Creighton. And then finally, from the perspective of ESG and the sustainability of facilities and real estate, Carla King. What I'm going to do now is ask each of you to give a brief perspective on what excites you about the potential for businesses to impact society and environment, and what's the one thing that gives you pause at this point. So Jack, you first.
Yeah, absolutely. Jack Colligan, delighted to be here. Just by way of expanding on background a little bit, Fulcrum Consulting Group is a Boston-based strategy consulting firm. We serve private equity and corporate clients. The majority of our work is supporting growth strategy initiatives and acquisitions as a commercial due diligence advisor. Our work is always focused on developing deep understanding of risks and opportunities that have the potential to impact future performance of a business. And in the past few years, the scope of our work has really expanded to include environmental, social, and governance, or ESG issues much more directly. And that's due to the increasing focus that many of our clients are developing as they respond to the expectations of their limited partners, the investors in their funds, and their requests to engage more formally on these non-financial issues. So it's a very exciting time in our space. It's a very exciting time in the sustainability world more generally. I think one thing that gives me pause is the identity crisis that ESG is really having in the media, playing out in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, the Economist article that was cited in some of the marketing materials for this panel. And the skeptics make a lot of good arguments, but they tend to focus primarily on the large sustainability scorecard issuers like Sustainalytics and MSCI. These providers deliver one-size-fits-all ratings for large publicly traded corporations, and focusing the conversation on those types of activities really is fairly reductive and completely misses a lot of the important work that is happening within public and private companies to improve the resilience of their business model. So that is something that's been interesting to watch play out and even see it get politicized. But to spin that more positively, it really is just a symptom of how mainstream these issues have become.
Thank you, Jack. Samantha?
Yeah, so my background, just so everyone knows, is a lot more in engineering. I've spent over 10 years in engineering. So when I'm thinking about ESG, I'm really putting my technical hat on here and coming through a lens for technology today. So at Analog Devices, which is a global, multi-billion-dollar global semiconductor company, I'm sure many of you guys have heard about semiconductors in the news for the last couple of years. But Analog Devices, we're in everything and every end market, from automotive, industrial, consumer, digital healthcare. And so we're looking at really the impact that it's going to have on a lot of different people and a lot of different markets. So thinking about that, my role is really, how do we take our technology and harness it and work in partnerships with our customers and within community organizations to really have a social impact. And thinking with that in mind, what really is exciting me about the future in ESG is really the future of advancement in technology and what it can do for ESG challenges. Really thinking about how it plays and can help stakeholders understanding the challenges and really addressing some of the risks and opportunities. To give an example here, you can think about the advancement in robotics, IoT, or even predictive modeling and AI machine learning capabilities. So if you take that and you think about an organization's operations, you can understand how monitoring and minimizing a company's wastes can be really beneficial, thinking about minimizing their water, their energy, or even their maintenance schedules. Furthermore, having this type of technology can also make a workplace safer. Using this technology can measure the air quality. Now you can think about different chemicals and things that are in the air, or during pandemics, air quality is increasingly important, and thinking about what is that impact. Now, how does this really impact different stakeholders? Ultimately, this technology can help minimize the impact it's having on the environment. From a healthy and safe perspective, this can minimize or reduce insurance costs. You can think about the improvement and just the morale of your employees, feeling safer and more productive. And having more data allows people to be able to make more defined decisions. So if you take a lot of AI machine learning, you can apply it towards weather modeling. And yes, that's great for understanding the impact that it's having on the planet, but you can also think about what does that mean for a logistics company in terms of minimizing weather risk to the supply chain and how to get ahead of that. So this technology can be applied in so many different facets, and having more data points and better quality of data allows people to make more informed decisions. Now, more data is great, but more data can also come with risk. Like anything, if you think about the type of data you're collecting, it's really important to have privacy and cybersecurity around that data. So if you think about your healthcare data that you have on someone, or you even think about the metaverse, what does this really look like? What are the types of policies that are going to go in place, and how are people really going to protect the consumer as well as businesses and others in this area? So that's really what I think we should think about going forward with the technology. It doesn't mean that we should stop moving forward, but just something to keep at the forefront and really prioritize.
Excellent. Thank you, Samantha. Ariel.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I would say my work in sustainability really kind of grew out of my experience as a Peace Corps volunteer. I experienced kind of that lack of access to clean water in a very kind of gut way. And so for me, I became interested in the apparel industry and the way the apparel industry uses water, but also pollutes water. So the company that I co-founded is Go Blue International, and we work in the apparel industry on more the environmental side of sustainability. So for us, that looks like water, energy, chemicals, and waste. We tend to focus on the chemical side. However, within the company, I tend to focus more on strategy and communications. So as a group, we work a lot with dye houses, fabric mills, things like that. I tend to work with brands and retailers, helping them prioritize, set a strategy, and start to implement it. And then in a perfect world, start to communicate their successes. I would say something that I see that's really encouraging and exciting is really just the level of awareness and knowledge that I see among general consumers, but also my students here at Tufts, also my clients. We have a gut sense of what manufacturing and what global supply chains actually look like and what the impacts are in a way that we didn't 10 years ago. And I think that's really encouraging. I also agree completely with Samantha that technology is so exciting. And in my industry, we see things like CO2-based waterless dyeing or mushroom-based alternatives to leather, things like that. But the reality is we kind of bounce between this very exciting high-tech space and this space where we're really trying to get suppliers to still put a nozzle on their hose and not have their hose running all day long. So it's kind of this bouncing back and forth, kind of the high-hanging fruit and low-hanging fruit world that we're inhabiting. I also think it's maybe not as exciting sounding as technology, but I think legislation is really going to be a game changer. And it's something that we're seeing emerging right now in the US, in the EU, in the UK. And I think that's really going to change the conversation around ESG and around disclosures. I would say what gives me pause about that, though, is that we're guaranteed to not get it right the first time. And, I think we will be in this process for a number of years of kind of course correcting and trying to find the balance of creating a system that is broad enough and applicable enough that it's useful, to different industries and enables us to compare the performance of different types of companies doing different types of things. But I worry that we lose the nuance a little bit when we do that. And that nuance is really important and really helps us understand the story. So I hope as an industry and as professionals working in the space, we can stick with it as we try to get that right over the next few years.
Yeah, it's I think you're pointing out that this is a patience game, and I'm not sure we're always patient. So I think that's a very
absolutely.
good point. Finally, Carla.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Carla King. I am our Executive Vice President for Sustainability and Resiliency at AEI Consultants. And similar to Jack, work with a wide range of commercial real estate clients, institutional clients, and pretty much anyone who has buildings and properties that they're looking at either for transactional purposes or because they're owning and managing them. And we really are looking at, both the built and natural environment. Our firm started kind of in the environmental space and has evolved into, obviously, ESG is a very important lens that's impacting, commercial real estate right here, obviously in Boston and Cambridge. There's different regulations that are driving our goal towards net zero. And so really working with these clients and helping them develop strategies for their assets and how to, comply with some of the legislation that's going on, but also to have their own strategy that makes sense within their business, right? We're talking about, can you still be profitable, and making decisions that aren't decisions or even statements in reports that can't be sustained and committed to without like a good plan that makes sense for their business. So it is a really important balancing act to understand, obviously, business objectives and priorities, compliance, and then obviously the aspirations to reduce, carbon footprint, water, waste. So it's a very exciting time. I think what's so cool about it is now there's actually degrees in sustainability. Like I totally would have pursued one of those. I kind of created that. And, I went to, for civil engineering and had to go through all of the civil engineering and engineering programs with a focus on environmental, and was essentially always trying to create my own sustainability degree. So it's so cool 20 years later that now there's programs and a lot of attention and excitement around sustainability. And it's not just a, oh, you're a tree hugger conversation. It's much bigger. It ties into business. It ties into the environment and social impacts. So that is super exciting for me from a career, and just seeing a lot more attention focused on this topic. I think one thing so a lot of excitement around ESG and sustainability and resiliency. And really, it's nice to see like a future-looking lens. We're focusing now on the future. A little bit environmental tended to always be kind of like what bad thing happened in the past. Now we're kind of looking through this forward-looking lens of like, what are the things that could happen? How is this going to impact things in the future? Both the people who are within the building and the building itself. Thinking about extreme storm events that might happen and how that can impact the people. So that to me is very important, to have that more future looking lens. Similar to what Jack said, one thing that always gives me pause is the media political hype surrounding the topic. Anytime you get like extreme opinions about anything in one direction or the other, it becomes controversial, and rather than making progress, there tends to be more argument about it rather than steps forward. And then the only other concern I sometimes get worried about is too much focus on any one aspect of sustainability and resiliency. Like right now, there's a lot of legislation and focus around greenhouse gas emissions. But are we thinking about waste and some of our renewable energy solutions, and what kind of waste problem could that cause 10, 20, 30 years down the road? And so always trying to think about all aspects, which is, again, one thing that's good about ESG is it's thinking about all aspects, but all aspects as it relates to kind of the forward looking. Are we making decisions today that solve one problem but create a different one, 50 years down the line? So those two things do give pause, but not so much that, we're not starting to make momentum forward, which is very exciting. And so excited to be surrounded by a great selection of panelists with different perspectives. So looking forward to our conversation.
Excellent. Just as a reminder to the audience, there is a Q&A function if you have specific questions that you want to ask us. The first kind of kickoff question is, we frame this whole discussion around, is it the role of business to save the planet? And maybe that is the question. Why is it important for businesses and the corporate side to be involved in these ESG kinds of discussions? And is it the goal of business to save the planet? So I'll open it up for anybody who wants to take a first whack at it. But is save the planet even really a goal that businesses should be worrying about?
I'm happy to chime in on this one. So I just mentioned hugging a tree. So, save the planet's in the same category as hugging a tree. I think that the term almost is a little, I'll say, antiquated in the sense of, I really think it should be more about protecting our future. And it's both the business's future, us as humans, and our environment. So really, it's much more dimensional than just the planet. It's our experience as on this planet, but it's also a risk mitigation approach for businesses. So this is about not just about the actual planet itself, but about their business and looking at their business again with that forward-looking lens of how do we protect the future, and constantly be thinking about how can we do better, both for our people. We'll get a little bit about that. Obviously, Samantha's involved in the social impact, but the people, planet, profit, that used to be a term that was, I think bigger in the 90s. So I think that is the best part of all of this, is just having that a lot of dimension to it and protecting our future more than just saving our planet.
Yeah, I'll zoom out as well, just taking the sort of goal of business piece. Really, since the 1970s, we've experienced an era of shareholder primacy, most commonly referenced to Milton Friedman's doctrine that the social responsibility of business is to maximize shareholder value. So that really has been the dominant view for the past 50 years. One tricky nuance that doesn't neatly get answered is, over what time period should shareholder value be maximized? And so I completely agree with Carla that it really needs to be more forward-looking than it has been. Sort of this prevailing view in practice has given way to a corporate culture characterized by short-term decision-making. Executives have very strong incentives to deliver on short-term growth goals, living and dying by quarterly earnings calls. And 50 years on, there's sufficient evidence that maybe we need to adopt a slightly longer term lens and resist this type of quarterly capitalism. Tons of examples, just a few from the last decade: Volkswagen's emissions scandals, Wells Fargo opening fraudulent accounts, BP's Deepwater Horizon spill. All of these outcomes that were disastrous to shareholder value were sort of kicked into motion by passing on the harder decisions in the near term in order to reach goals that were promised to investors, shareholders, employees who have incentives to reach certain targets. And so, no one individual business is, as you said, in a position to save the planet. But the goal for business should be growth with resilience. So starting in our models to factor in for more and more of these types of issues that are critical to stakeholders that influence the financial performance of a business. It's not just about shareholders. In order to pursue the interests of shareholders, you need to understand who your key stakeholders are: customers, employees, suppliers. You need to reflect and understand their values and interests if you're going to be able to be successful in this very competitive environment.
And in an environment of rapid change, right? If you don't have that, if you don't have your stakeholders with you going through this, it's going to be rough.
And those expectations from shareholders change over time. And so it's not a conversation you can have once and then develop a strategy. It's dynamic, it's fluid, as we've seen. Businesses need to innovate quickly and they need to plan for responding to changes as events play out and as new information is revealed.
Samantha, how about your perspective from the large corporation side? What is driving this kind of focus around these topics, ESG topics?
No, I think the topic in general is, it's not new, it's just under a different frame. We've always had, I think, a lens of corporate citizenship, of general sustainability, and now ESG, which is having a lot more structure and resiliency around it, right? And compliance and all the governance behind it, right? It's not as simple as this, but I'll put it this way. It's businesses would rather be a part of the solution than the problem, right? They would rather look at it through the lens of, how can I work with my different stakeholders? How can I help my consumers or customers and my employees be able to reduce our impact together? Because it is a future. For other different businesses, you can think about, okay, you see a warming planet and we're in a business model. Going back to my data example, more and more data is happening. You need more data centers. Data centers produce a lot of heat. How are you going to power these data centers? How are you going to minimize the heat? What is the impact it's going to have? What is a business opportunity here as well, right? To look at this and determine to solve these problems. The same sense, when you think about saving the planet, I always tell people these are complementary. You're not saving the planet, you're saving people, right? Ultimately life. So the impact it's having on society, when you look at this, it's, again, going back to what Carla said, it's a risk assessment in terms of, how are we minimizing the risk it's having on our communities and our people and our employees? Everybody is impacted by this, not just you as a business from a financial perspective, which is definitely important, but literally your operations. As you're looking at these increasing storms, how does it impact your operations? How is it impacting your supply chains? There's so many factors in this that it doesn't make sense to not focus on this topic. But I think trying to simplify as much as possible is it's because you would rather be a part of that solution than the actual challenge, and really be able to tackle this is really fundamental. And a lot of people want to do good. I believe, I try to be a little bit optimistic here. I think a lot of people want to do good. And I do think the saying, when you do good, you can do really well from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, I think you picked up on something also that companies are people too, right? The employees are getting a bigger and bigger voice into what they want to, what they want to be a part of. So that's also an important part of it, I think. Ariel, any final comments?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I see it quite similarly to how Jack presented it, which is that, we've really shifted from this idea of shareholder primacy to stakeholder primacy, and that has everything to do with timeframes. And we need to really zoom out and look at things from a much broader, longer term perspective, because you can maximize value for your shareholders, in the short term and be very successful for a couple of years. And then what? Is that the goal of your business, or do you want to do something that lasts for a long time, that contributes, to humanity in a positive way, but also can be a sustainable business that can exist for the long term? And I think, business occupies this very interesting space because on the one hand, we've given businesses such a huge role in our lives and in our society, and there's so much power there. It's a missed opportunity to not use the power there as a lever for change. But on the other hand, we have to be really careful because, I think of an example from the apparel industry. Does it make sense for a Western fashion brand to create a women's empowerment program for garment workers in Bangladesh? Maybe, maybe not. Are they the experts in that? Probably not. Is there the potential to do more harm than good? Yeah. So I think it's always that balancing act of kind of figuring out how to contribute while not getting so far out of your lane that you risk those unintended consequences, a little bit like what Carla was saying about what happens in the future. So it's a complicated space, but I do think, if we're going right back to, is saving the planet the right goal of business? I think, businesses need to think about their stakeholders, their employees, what is going to keep them in business for the long term. And that has to incorporate things like environmental sustainability, social sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of those things. That's what a long-term successful business needs to incorporate.
Yeah, and I also think we didn't touch on it, but I think when you talk about the long-term one of the big long-term assets of a company is its brand. I mean, that does have years of life. Like Jack, you were mentioning VW is probably still, from a brand perspective, still dealing with the stuff that happened in the late 2000s. So brand is one of the vessels of your long-term value, right? And you, as Samantha said, you want your brand tied to good, not bad. The other thing that I think you guys all touched on is with these changes going on in the world, both the social changes and the environmental changes, it's also opportunity. Like those are dislocations. So the energy market's getting completely redone, right? So there's huge opportunities. I'm sure Analog Devices is part of that. You know, all companies have an opportunity now with dislocation to change and maybe get a benefit out of it. So I think risk is one side of it, but there's also the opportunity side. All right, we're gonna now do a quick poll. So the poll question is about what entities, what stakeholders in the whole world of environmental and climate change, who has the most ability to impact change for climate? So I'm gonna give you guys a few seconds to vote, and then we will have a quick discussion. And panelists, we do have a couple of questions if somebody wants to take a look.
Yeah, just looking at the Q&A, Sheldon asks, how do we get business to include decision-making to better consider future costs of mitigation, for example, extended producer responsibility? So how do we sort of fight back against that short-term bias? I think there's a whole array of different answers. Just a few that I think are happening is consumer decision making. So whoever those customers are, customers vote with their wallet. Employees, they vote with their feet, and that is something that business leaders are dealing with in very direct ways. And so over time, good responsible business leaders are rewarded. Those businesses grow. Bad actors are starved from demand as well as talent attrition. And so I think as a broader consumer community, we all have a lot more power collectively than we may realize. It does come with the responsibility to educate ourselves on the purchases, the decisions that we're making, what impacts they have longer term for really forever. Businesses have been able to free ride on sort of polluting activities, and those externalities really haven't needed to be incurred by those businesses. And so regulators are now more and more shifting that cost back to the producer. But consumers are also part of that push.
Yeah, to reflect the true cost of the business activity as opposed to just the narrow. But yeah, exactly. So the poll question is complete, and it's interesting. I'll have each of you kind of comment on it, but looks like regulations is the one that folks picked on as the most. That having the proper regulatory environment is going to create the incentives and the measurement and the carrot and stick side of it to actually get change to happen. Jack, I'll have you start. Like, make the case why investors are a big player in moving us forward in the ESG world.
Yeah, happy to, and no wrong answer choice there. But it's interesting. The regulators clearly they have the power to put a rule in place that companies have to play. They make the rules of the road, and so they do have tremendous potential to impact change on these issues. However, they respond to the incentives and demands of their constituents, and investors are a key constituent. It's not the tree huggers that got the SEC to publish their latest ruling on climate-related financial disclosures, requiring public companies to not only disclose and estimate their risk exposure to climate change, but also their emissions in scope 1, 2, and 3. And it's really the investors, the largest asset owners in the world, who are making investment decisions that are multi-generational and do need to factor for how is our portfolio going to look if we don't decarbonize and achieve our sustainable development goals. And so the investors, the lowest rated here, but certainly an important and loud voice as it informs the most commonly mentioned response here.
Yeah, and I'd also say that the capital, the capital that's going to help make the transition, it comes from the investors. The investors have to they have a voice in where capital goes, right? It's going to go to where they say it's going to go. So, Ariel, maybe you can talk about consumers, since you're familiar with an industry that's very consumer driven. What's your perspective on how much consumers can help drive these changes in our society and around environment and social change?
I mean, it's so tricky with consumers. I mean, I will honestly say I didn't realize we couldn't vote, and I was trying to click on regulation because that was going to be my. And I was also thinking, if the question said who can change things the most quickly, then I would probably say investors. But when it comes to consumers, we're asking a lot of consumers right now. If a consumer is to make an informed choice about something like apparel, they really need to be an expert in it. And maybe when you're going to buy a new car, you spend the time and the energy doing the research and understanding, because that's going to be the only car you're going to buy for the next, hopefully ever at this point, but decade, let's say. But if you need a pair of socks, does it make sense to become an expert in the apparel industry before you buy a pair of socks? Not really. So I think it's difficult to ask a lot of consumers, because then we have to know everything about every industry in order to make an informed choice. That said, I think as consumers, we can certainly kind of flex our muscle a little bit more. We can draw some basic conclusions like, hey, if this product is really, really inexpensive, can I assume that somebody's losing out here? And generally, the answer would be yes. So I think, we really need to, as consumers, and of course, I think through the apparel ends here, but we need to stop thinking about certain products as disposable when that was never the intention for those products. So yes, by buying smarter, buying less, taking proper care of things, that is a huge role that we can play. And we certainly do vote with our wallets. We certainly do express our values based on what we buy and who we buy it from. I find a strategy that works quite well as a consumer. Even if you don't really know the issues at play, if you're making a purchase, ask a question. Use your voice in any way you can to express your interests, because a lot of these companies are tracking that information. Again, thinking about apparel, when things get returned, they're going to track, was the neck hole a bit funny, or was the arm too long? Suddenly people go into shops and start asking questions about how things are made or what workers are paid. They're going to be tracking that as well. So we can use our voice, even if we aren't necessarily an expert in, whatever it is that we're purchasing.
And regulators help us exercise the voice as well. We didn't always have
Absolutely.
calories and nutritional information on our food.
Labeling, yep.
But I'm buying apparel and it shows up with the emissions footprint of that product.
Yeah, how many gallons of gas equivalent?
Yeah, and I see in one of the questions somebody brought up, greenwashing, and I think I agree. It's rampant, and as a consumer, how can you navigate that world? And again, I think that's where a lot of regulation comes in. What can you say and how can you say it? And I think we do a lot of work with clients in the EU, and I think they were really smart about how they kind of went about their regulatory system, which started with basically a list of terms, definitions, and thresholds so that we can get our vocabulary the same. We can all talk the same language, speak to each other, and mean the same thing, and really kind of set that as the baseline before we start assigning values to things, at least have definitions. Because right now it's kind of the wild west of what things mean and what you can say. And as a consumer, that's impossible to navigate.
Well, as humans, which we all are, we are storytellers, right? And if you don't have the language and you don't have a forum to tell the story, we can't do anything. We have to have stories. Mm-hmm. Ariel or Samantha, anything to add and perspective on the poll before we go on to the next question?
No, I mean, I agree with a lot of this. Again, if I look at it from like a technology or innovation perspective, yes, it's important, it's a tool, but there needs to be like a demand for it, and then it needs to have a strong reason to do it, right? Like, so it's like, yes, you can do it and you can create this technology, but if there's no purpose or regulation or something putting it into use, then what is the goal of it ultimately?
Yeah. But do you agree that in order to actually meet the societal let's just use climate change as an example, to meet the societal imperative of that, we are going to need innovation. We have to keep investing in new techniques, new ways of solving the problem. So there is that balance.
100%. When you're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, right, the hot topic everyone's talking about today, understanding what is or even carbon, right, carbon uptake or downtake, who's measuring that carbon and how accurate is it? And going back to what Ariel you were saying, or Scott, in terms of the story behind it. So a data point is great, but a data point in itself with no story is also not great either, right? And so I think
not actionable. You can't do anything.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that, to avoid greenwashing, you need to have more data and backed data with, like, I agree with the definition. So everyone's speaking the same level of language and to have the right story behind it. And yeah, innovation can help with that messaging, that storytelling. So, you're saying I'm doing all these things to minimize my greenhouse gases or to remove carbon or sequestering carbon or whatever it is. But does anyone really know what that looks like and how is it measured and tracked? And is there any reputable technology on that? So getting innovation to be able to handle this and then getting it checked off and certified, like, yes, this is this is working, is incredibly important. So again, still innovation is key, but not on its own. You still need to have that certification and regulations and stuff around it as well.
Excellent. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit more on the social dimension of ESG. So my question to you all is, we hear about DEI, pay inequality, the Great Migration. What is motivating today's workforce to impact company culture and fairness in society? Like, how important are employees now to driving company behavior?
Sure, I'll start here. So most people, including everyone on this call, right, wants to align their values with the company that they're working for, right? We spend so much time and energy and life with companies that it's really important for it to be an extension of you almost. So, to put it better, employees or workers are really more concerned about making a difference than just making a product, right? So I'm sure, Ariel's Medicine is a perfect example, right? It's about making a difference with the product, not just making a product like any other, consumer. But I like to think about this as like a user experience, which is like that the interaction you can have with the product in terms of consumer demand, right? In terms of how the user experience, we want to have a better experience in terms of greater accessibility, more transparency, more connectivity, more personalization, because we're all individuals. So one sock to another person, whatever. It's really important because we're all individuals. And so again, like putting the technology hat and thinking about a real experience is the trend in going towards a more consumer-centric healthcare experience, right? You want to be able to make more informed decisions on where you're receiving care, how you're receiving care, how much you're paying for it, having more transparency on what it looks like. This is a big topic. So if you can, correlate that experience, that user experience as a consumer back into a worker experience, it's the same thing. You want to have more accessibility, whether it's physical or neurodiversity. You're thinking about connectivity in terms of like a hybrid workforce model or connectivity into a company's purpose. If you're thinking about it in the sense of having more transparency, again, not just greenwashing, but like, are we really making a difference? What is our carbon footprint? Like, are we walking to the things like from the regulations and are we really being compliant? Are we, avoiding any type of harassment policies and supply chain resiliencies, et cetera. And then lastly, on the personalization, it's really simple. People just want to have a place where they belong, they're included, and that they are properly paid for that, and they have the proper opportunities. So I see the consumer experience the same as or user experience the same as a worker experience. We're seeing those same feelings and emotions embedded into how we're viewing of working in a company.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. And I think it's important. It's giving a voice to a lot more, to everybody, really, to a voice to everybody to express. And, really there's that desire to, I forget who said it earlier, but that desire to be part of something bigger. And I think that always inherently existed in humans, but now people are more willing to speak up and stand up to what is right and want to be a part of a company that's making good decisions and not work for a company that isn't treating their people the right way or is, doing something that may negatively impact the environment. So that is one of the most amazing things about this is like, while you're creating that language around all of this, you're also empowering voices. So now people have the terminology to speak up and say, this is why, and this is the benefit. There's now studies being done about how this can benefit businesses. This is not just because it's the right thing to do, but there's also a long-term benefit to organizations to do things.
You make better decisions. You can address a wider audience of customers because you have that perspective. Yeah, Ariel, maybe a slight swivel on that question is like, is this employee empowerment which we seem to be living in right now? I think in part because the voice is strong, and also there's alternatives. Like they can go move. Employment mobility is high right now, but I don't know if maybe you have a perspective in the second and third world. Is there also a shift to where the workers are going to have a stronger voice, or is this really a U.S. and Europe phenomenon?
I don't think this is just a US and Europe phenomenon. And we see, again, going back to technology and technology being such an enabler for change. We're seeing things like smartphone-based platforms for workers in garment factories to be able to post, publicly, hey, this is what's happening at our factory and we need support on XYZ. Or, hey, this is what we're getting paid. What are you getting paid up the road? So workers, worker voice is now like a much stronger factor because we can, I guess going back to data again, we can share the data with one another. What's actually happening? Is it better there, worse there? What can I do to change it? And I see that. We've seen that in Bangladesh. We're seeing that in India. We're seeing that in a lot of these manufacturing regions where we're kind of skipping technological stages and going straight to kind of the latest, which enables
and everybody has a cell phone, right? So
yeah, everybody has a cell phone now. And I think on the flip side of that, going back to reputation a little bit, what you brought up earlier, because we all have smartphones, we can all be armchair activists, right? And brands really have to worry about what we're all going to say about them, whether that comes from a consumer perspective or an employee perspective. And I think employees are a critical stakeholder group, and it's kind of easy to overlook them when you're thinking mostly about your shareholders, but they're critical. They make up your culture, your values, your leadership structure, and all of that really, I think, contributes to the long-term success of a company. If that's a company that is intending to exist and be successful for a long time, you need to consider those factors.
Excellent. Well, why don't we try the second poll? We'll do a quick version of this one so we can wrap up the conversation. But I'm interested in what our audience thinks are the key stakeholders that can actually drive a very particular thing: pay inequality, both gender and worker to manager pay inequality.
While people are looking at that, completely agree with Ariel's point there about technology, the smartphone, social media, the impact that's had. There's a lot of talk about shifting generational values, this new generation. I find it hard to believe that they're entirely different than prior generations, outside of the fact that they have grown up in a world where everyone is walking around with a device capable of sharing the world as it is. and the world is full of injustice. And these platforms have proven very capable of mobilizing large groups in disparate communities overnight. It's not going to change.
Excellent. So we have almost 2/3 of our audience weighed in, and they do say companies have a big opportunity or a big responsibility for dealing with pay inequality, and they think that regulations is going to probably be second to that. But at the end of the day, companies, in order to stay viable, are going to have to address these kinds of issues. All right, excellent. So again, thanks audience for your participation. We're going to shift now to sort of some closing perspectives. And what I'd like each of you to talk about is your perspective on how companies what are some like practical things, or how companies can start moving in the direction of having ESG be a strong component, almost as, up there with their financials in driving how they behave and what they do in the marketplace. So I'll do it in reverse order this time. Ariel, you want to start?
I guess if I'm thinking about like a practical first step, I kind of agree with GRI, with the Global Reporting Initiative, that you need to understand what matters to your stakeholders. I keep harping on stakeholders, but I really think it's critical. So
it's not just Wall Street, as Jack says.
Yeah. You need to understand what matters to your employees, what matters to your customers, what matters to communities impacted by your presence, whether that's, shops or manufacturing, or, or even your lack of presence. So I really think understanding that broader landscape and how you fit in with it helps, on the one hand, in terms of prioritizing, what are the issues that we really need to have on our radar, but also risk identification. Like, ooh, that really wasn't on our radar, and that is high on the list for these, 4 key stakeholders. And gosh, one of them is the media, so probably we should jump on that. So I think that's a tangible first step. And then I would also add that overall, for companies to be successful, I really think leadership matters. I really think culture matters. I really think that long-term thinking is critical. And we're going to have to kind of shift the way we probably educate and reward leaders, and the types of leaders that we encourage in businesses, because we need people who can take that broader perspective, can take that sort of longer time horizon, and are willing to engage with stakeholders and create these cultures that will be successful in the long term.
Yes, very good point. Carla.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is understanding where you're at today, and really establishing your starting point, and understanding what your organization's business growth and objectives are, and then creating a strategy. So I really see this as a journey, and it's like mapping out something. One of 2 analogies I have is just you can't get there if you don't know where you're starting. And so I think sometimes people get very overwhelmed by ESG and the data, and where how do I understand? And I really try to say, okay, let's break this down and understand where we're at today. Like, do you know your carbon footprint? And most of the time they're like, no. Okay, let's not set goals about reducing it or things like that until we understand where you're at today. Then we have to also overlay, what are your business growth objectives? Because I've literally had some people we've talked to, and they're like, yeah, we're going to reduce our energy by 25%. And they're like, oh, does that incorporate your growth plan? Well, no, and it's like, okay, let's just not get too far ahead of ourselves so that we're not overcommitting to something that you can't accomplish or doesn't make sense for your business. So I think that's a really important thing. Understand where you're at today, and just start making, tangible action items that you can actually achieve, versus trying to take on the world, and do it all in the next year. We're going to write this policy, we're going to write this plan, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And it's like, okay, no. What are some really actionable things that you can do that are going to make impact on your employees, on, your environmental footprint, and kind of map that out for your business. And everyone's going to have a customized. So while there's frameworks on the reporting side that are creating consistency between businesses, everyone's journey and everyone's action plan is going to be very different. And there's not one solution that works for everyone. It really needs to take into consideration all the stakeholders and their business. So really that roadmap and to their sustainability journey.
And I think we kind of hit on it earlier, patience.
Yes.
And this
a marathon, not a sprint.
And it needs to be systemic. This isn't just a gloss over, write a report and you're done. This has to be like deep into your culture and your operations. Otherwise it won't work.
Correct. 100%.
Samantha.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to echo Carla and Ariel too much, but I do think first it needs to be at the leadership level. You need to have complete buy-in and embedded completely at the leadership level, all the way down throughout the company and in each of the roles and responsibilities. We always like to talk about you have your subject matter experts in each area of the company, whether it's your DEI team, but DEI cannot hold DEI for the whole company. They can help embed the culture and put policies and things around place, but ultimately everybody's responsible for making the culture inclusive and belonging and hiring diverse candidates and thinking about diversity in terms of the products you're developing, all the way into, okay, well, we're trying to be more environmentally friendly. Yes, in your operations, and say you have manufacturing, you can do that. But again, everyone's responsible for managing your energy, turning off the lights. It's like the little things, right? But it really needs to be embedded in how you think about it. And then exactly what Carla said is it is a journey. I think people need to understand, and it goes back to the very beginning. And I think it's a really good book ending to this, which is saving the planet. It's a goal, but it's an always moving goal, right? Where we're always trying to do the best that we can with the data that we have, and then making the improvements where we can with that. And it's going to be at different levels in different parts of the company and in each of the E, S, and G components of that. So really understanding where you want to go in short term versus long term, and thinking about, will my short term impacts have these long term implications on the company? I think, Carla, you were mentioning this, and Ariel as well, in terms of what does this outlook really look like long term, and what are we doing more harm than good? And it's not always about the short term benefits. And then, again, throwing the technology and business side back on that is looking at the economic opportunity and tying it, yes, your growth opportunities, where these business areas, a lot of organizations are looking now at green revenue and so on. There's just a lot of endless potential here. And so depending on if you're just an everyday employee or a manager or investor, whatever, that's listening to this call, each person kind of has a role to play. And I think starting the conversation at what is the commitment level of a company is the first start.
Excellent. Jack, you get to finish this out.
I agree with all of the above. So I'll just try to summarize. I agree. You have to start somewhere, starting with a stakeholder identification process is completely the right place to start. As Ariel said, I think Carla mentioned focusing on the issues that are most important to your business, conducting a materiality assessment, prioritizing the myriad ESG issues on just a handful that have the potential to really move the needle in terms of the risks that your business is exposed to, but also opportunities that are available. Start with low-hanging fruit. Look at what your competitors are doing and catch up anywhere where you're deficient on particularly any of those sort of risk management opportunities, but then really pick 2 or 3 KPIs on the risk side, 2 or 3 KPIs on the opportunity side, and it's going to look completely different depending on what industry you're in. If you're a food grower in California, you will be focused on the impact that a changing climate has on your business. You should consider the opportunities to reduce water consumption. That will make you a more resilient business in your industry. If you're a consumer products company, you should consider opportunities to delight your customers with sustainable, values-aligned packaging. If you're a manufacturing business, it might be environmental issues. You could probably start at home with workplace safety. Professional services firms like ours engagement. So there is no one size fits all, but it's a fascinating journey, and it's a lot of fun to see progress and to build capabilities in these arenas.
Thank you, Jack. I think this has been a great panel. Obviously, in an hour, we couldn't solve ESG, but I think we elucidated some of the key things to consider, and also I think some practical steps to start the process. I will say at the end of the day, we hit on it many times, but a lot of this, what we talked about, was about consistent data and a framework to report. And it seems like an underlying thing that we're making progress. But that seems like a way that at the end of the day, we're going to be able to have something we can all hang on to. So I'll just leave that as my parting comment. That seems to be an important thing, that as an industry and as a government and regulators working together, we have to have a good framework for common understanding. Thank you all to everybody who participated today. Hopefully this was helped put some perspective and gave you a new way of thinking about this ESG challenge. As you exit, you'll be asked to take a survey. If you can take a few minutes to do that, it would really help us as we fill out our portfolio of these keynote addresses and panels. So again, thank you for your time, and thank you to the panel.